Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, but everybody just calls me Mike, and we're doing the conspiracy commentaries here with Dallas Willard's The Divine Conspiracy. And this is another one of those unusual ones in which I have a guest, and my guest is Seán Mullan from Dublin. And you may not know who he is, but you will be very happy to meet him in a moment. I'll introduce him in a second, but I do want to say, because these are a bit longer, you may want to switch over to the podcast version of this and not watch the video in case you are watching the video right now, because we'll just kind of get into it and I'll forget that the video is actually there. And podcast might be more suited to the kind of format that we have here. What we'll be doing is talking about a larger section in chapter 1. It's titled Word from a Different Reality. In my edition, it starts on page 11, goes to page 21. And I'm really excited to have Seán talk about this with me. Seán is the first person that I met in Europe when I moved here 17 years ago, who had read this book, and it just seemed like he really got it. And some of the things that he got were Dallas's presentation of Jesus and his presentation of ordinary life. Seán, at that point, I don't think had started what he's into now, but I've learned that he began his working career as a navigation officer for the Merchant Navy, and then he went into pastoring some churches. So pastor, he was a Protestant pastor there in Ireland, a couple churches. And then he felt like he should step out of that role and start a social enterprise in the city of Dublin, where he lives now. He's in a section of the town there and has begun something called Third Space, which is, from the looks of it, just a cafe, but it's a social enterprise. So it's intended to do good to the community, not only in being in that particular part of the city, but sorts of people that they hire and bring into the cafe, as well as the ability for other groups to come in and use the cafe. There's two things that kind of stood out to me about Seán when I first met him, and one was that he had just been on the Camino de Santiago, the St. Jacob's Way in Spain, and he was just alive with stories from that trip. And the other thing was that he had completed we'll ask him here in a second, I don't know, second, third time, The Divine Conspiracy, and he was alive with this book and the ideas that were flowing out of it and into him, and helping to shape his idea of what it means to follow Jesus in Europe today. So here he is, Seán Mullan. And Seán, good to see you. How you doing today?
Good to be with you, Mike. Delighted to be here.
What's Dublin look like today?
The sun is shining. It's been a beautiful day. We've had good weather now for about a week. Irish summers are infamous for the unpredictability of the weather. You can get four seasons in one day in an Irish summer. But today we've just had one season. It's definitely been summer all day, and we're enjoying it.
Right. I got everything right about what you're up to now with Third Space. You're there full time, right?
Yes, I am there full time. I do other things on the side in my spare time. Anna and I are in a phase of life that we think of as grandparenting. So not just in relation to our own grandchildren. We have 3 granddaughters who are all, 3 and under. But also in relation to people who are involved in church planting and church leadership. There's a whole group of people in Dublin around in their 30s or 40s. So we have a sense of having a role supporting them, encouraging them, and we really enjoy that because it's a bit like grandparenting. You know, you get all the joy and none of the responsibility.
Right. Well, when I met you the first time, it was 2006, I remember you saying something like, I finished the book for the 5th time. Is that remotely possible?
Yes, it is. It probably is. I've read it many times. I don't remember how many times, but I certainly would have read it several times by then. Yeah. And probably the cover would have fallen off it by then.
There you go.
And it's and I've read it quite a few times since as well.
And how did you discover this book?
We moved to Dublin from Cork, which is on the south of Ireland, in the year 2000. And we were asked to come to lead a church that had been planted in a suburb of Dublin. And one of the other leaders in the church was a disciple of Dallas. He had listened to a lot of his material. He had been to a conference in the States that Dallas Willard had spoken at. And so he was very enthusiastic and started off just giving me some cassette tapes to listen to, tell you how long ago it was. So I remember starting to listen to them, and I don't know whether it was the first or the second one. I fell asleep listening to it. And I thought, oh, this guy is really boring to listen to, you know, very hard to listen to. I discovered later that was deliberate, that he made no effort to try to make it more interesting. That's part of his thinking, that the message itself was interesting enough.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that he tried to put people to sleep, but there are speakers and ministers who try to craft their messages in a way that you are on the edge of your seat for the whole thing. And he did not do that. He could have. He could have, actually. And if you hear some of his earlier messages, he was much more of a fiery Baptist preacher.
Yeah. He was also very funny, so he certainly could have used that more. But I do think that there was a conscious attempt for him not to get in the way of the message that he was bringing to his audience, that he wanted to stay out of the way as much as possible. So after eventually getting around to listening to the tapes and some of it starting to penetrate a little bit, then I began work on the book. And like the tapes, I, got so far, then got stuck, went back again, tried again. And I think it was probably the 3rd time of starting to read it, that I managed to get to a place where I felt like, oh, this is starting to make sense to me, and kept going with it. And then I think I got to the end of it and immediately went back to the start and started again.
Do you do that often? Just as an aside, do you often finish a book and start it again if you really liked it?
Very rarely. it would only be with the sense of, okay, there's more in this I haven't got. That feeling that I need to go back again and try a little bit more and see what else I can get out of it. So no, it wouldn't be a common practice.
Yeah. So do you remember what made this book one, which you decided I need to start from the beginning again?
I think one of the things was that by the time I got to the end of it, I was saying to myself, I thought I knew Jesus, and I thought I knew what the Christian life was all about. But now I realize that I didn't know it all. And there's actually a piece in this section that I think right at the beginning of this section where he says something like that people think they have heard the invitation. They think they have accepted it or rejected it, but they have not. The difficulty today is to hear it at all. And I think that I was in that category, that I felt I had understood the message, the Jesus message, what it was about, and I was in the category of those who had accepted it. I was seeking to live it as best I could. And then I discovered that there's way more to it than I had understood or realized. And once you get over the shock of that, it actually becomes very exciting then, because there's like this whole country to explore.
Yeah. Can you put some more detail on that? What maybe had you understood before, and what did Dallas help you understand differently?
I think one of the key things was that there was the whole idea of living life with God.
Okay.
That for me, up until then, it was about, I understood what was expected of me. I understood what God had done for me, particularly in Jesus. I understood the implications of that for my life in terms of how I should live. But it was the idea of partnership, collaboration, living life with God in the everyday, in the ordinary, not just in the religious times or the spiritual times or the designated God times, but in the ordinary in the everyday, and the becoming aware of the reality of the kingdom, that I was never away from the kingdom, that God's kingdom was always present all around, and the opportunity to interact with God was mine all the time, not in special moments, not in special places, not with special people, but all the time, anywhere. At one stage, I worked with some people doing a study, and we tried to paraphrase that initial announcement in Mark, the kingdom of God is at hand. And somebody came up with this, their phrase was, the government of God, or the governing activity of God is right under your nose. And that was that sense of the nearness of it all and the reality of it all. And there would have been, I think, quite a few times where it was just overwhelming. It was like standing in a river and suddenly getting knocked over in the river, and the river just sweeping over you. There were times when I felt like that in it.
Yeah. You've read this section that we we're going to talk about today, this word from a different reality. And I've been doing these short videos on this section, and one of the things that really stands out to me this time is how hard Dallas is trying to present Jesus in a way that's different from what people expect. And I think he's actually kind of struggling to do it. I don't even know that this is his best attempt. It's very good, but it's something that I learned when I was researching his biography. But this first chapter, he rewrote this so many times. His wife didn't like it when he wrote the first time, and he wrote it again and again, just trying to find something that really worked, because he didn't think Jesus came across, at least in the world around him, in a way that was helpful for people.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of the way that he spoke of Jesus in here, or how he writes about Jesus? How he's trying to kind of pass him on?
I think one of the things that stood out for me was the idea of the ordinariness of Jesus. He at one stage he says if he had come today, he could have taken up almost any occupation. It wouldn't have mattered what he did. It seems that at that time that he was a handyman, stroke carpenter, stroke tradesman of some kind, and I think that notion of the real ordinariness of this man, this Galilean peasant man who, once he began traveling and becoming a more public figure, one of his biggest challenges was the establishment saying, "Who is this guy? And who does he think he is?" Because he was so ordinary. And I appreciated that in Dallas's presentation, that he doesn't try to make him out to be more than the Gospels show him to be, because the Gospel writers ignore the first 30 years basically, apart from those little incidents, and I think that that's part of the essential nature of what it is that he's trying to explain, that this is God's presence in ordinary life, not his invitation to us to come into some kind of religious life, to come into some other world that he has created. The different reality has come into our reality rather than the other way around. And that is the message, is that the reality is here.
Yeah. How likely is a person in Ireland to find Jesus in ordinary life?
Jesus in Ireland has been religified, it's not a word, religionized into some kind of ethereal realm that in the minds of the vast majority of people is utterly disconnected from the lives that they're living every day. I did a little survey last Christmas, in which I sought the help of our children who are all in their 30s, and they helped me to construct the survey first of all, and then I asked them to send it out to a bunch of their friends who had no interest in church or religion or anything like that. And it was an anonymous survey. and the central question, there were a lot of questions around Jesus, this figure that we mark at this time of year, Christmas. But for me, the most significant question was, if you were facing a significant life decision that you had to face, how important would the teaching or thinking or writing about Jesus of Nazareth be for you in that decision-making process? And apart from one person, everybody else scored it as low as possible. You know, it was of no significance. In fact, the comments for a few of the comments showed that the idea had never even crossed their minds. You know, that there would be anything in Jesus's thinking that would be of any help or assistance to them. I think that that's because Jesus is this kind of ethereal figure that you see, and you see him everywhere in Ireland still. Maybe it's like that in Bavaria as well, but the statues, there's, you know, all kinds of markers of him. One nearby has him like this, hands out, and somebody had put a COVID 2 meter distance line underneath. So it looks like you say, you know, stay 2 meters apart, and that's kind of, you know, as serious as people will take it. You know, that it's just not a part of life. That would be the normal thinking, not necessarily reacting strongly against it or anything like that, but just simply not something that they've ever even considered.
Yeah. That makes me think of a number of things. And one is, who would they invite into that decision-making time? I know you probably didn't put that question on the survey, but just take a guess at.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, even my experience from my own children, parents, mentors, friends, educators, or you know, a particular self-help book that they've picked up along the way that they've found, you know, or somebody that they've listened to in a TED talk or something like that, you know. So a contemporary popular figure would be much more likely to be someone that they would think about their teaching rather than someone like Jesus. They're inoculated. You know, the extent of church influence, organized church influence in Ireland is such that a generation or two has been effectively inoculated to think this is not. It's got nothing to say to us.
Yeah. It's as if there's a large buffer there between Jesus and their everyday life, and for whatever reason that they can't get past that buffer.
Yeah, I think that's true. And if you ask me to describe the buffer, I would say it is the understanding that Jesus is only interested in the religious, moral behavior aspects of your person and your life. That he's not particularly interested in what career you choose, what kind of relationships you're in, how they're going, any of those things.
Yeah.
Unless you're having sex with someone that you're not married to or something like that, you know. But behavior issues. But that he is the notion that Jesus is interested in what kind of person you are and what kind of person you're becoming, and how the journey through life is going for you. That just doesn't come into people's awareness, into their consciousness.
Today, I'm reading the Gospel of John, and I was reading John 9 today. John 9 is the story of Jesus who heals this man who is born blind, and he heals him, or he spits on mud and puts the spit on his eyes, and then goes and tells him to wash, and I'm sure he was very grateful to go and wash. It's strange, spitting on the ground and putting mud on people's eyes hasn't really taken off as a Christian ritual. But foot washing has, but spitting, not so much. But he heals this man, I should say, when he finally goes and washes, he can see and he's healed. But the interesting thing is he doesn't know Jesus did it. Jesus wasn't there anymore. Jesus has disappeared. He knows that there's been some sort of positive effect on his life from somebody. And it's interesting too about the ancient world, and really not too long ago, nobody knew what anybody looked like. There were no photographs around of famous people, of rulers. You wouldn't know them if you saw them on the street. And so in this story, Jesus does come back to the man and sort of says, look, I'm the guy that did this. But I was thinking in preparation for our conversation here that that's a lot like where Europe is now. Jesus has had an extremely profound effect on not only the world, but Europe in particular. Extremely positive effect. And you don't have to be a professional historian to just look back and see how he has shaped so many areas of European life. And really until about the 1960s in most countries, in Ireland it lasted a lot longer, the most common people were a part of church and were still quite connected to Jesus. But now that people have moved a step away, it's as if we still benefit from a lot of what Jesus has done in our history, but we've kind of forgotten what he looks like, or who really that person is, who healed us, who gave us sight, who gave us these gifts.
I like your metaphor, and I especially like this idea of what does he look like, and that goes back to what Dallas says in that chat. We think that we've heard the invitation, we think we know what this was about, and that's the Ireland that I grew up in was that people connected to church, large scale. Over 80% of people were in church every weekend in Ireland back then. But there was not even then the connection to the life that that Dallas describes here that is on offer. It was much more about the institution that had replaced Jesus, I think. And you can't have a relationship with an institution. You either obey it or you rebel against it, but you don't have a relationship. Whereas what you're describing, and even those two conversations in John's Gospel, the idea that they were able to have conversations about what had gone on and interact on it, and that's what you find throughout the Gospels, and that is completely new to people. Let's talk about this. In the first chapter of John's Gospel, where there's that kind of the group that had been following John the Baptist, and then John the Baptist points out this other guy, and two of them follow him, and he turns around and says, "What do you want?" And the best they can come up with is, "Where are you staying?" And he says, "Come and see." And just the simplicity of it and the ordinariness of it, not who are you, or can you explain, the idea of being a Messiah or something like that, where are you staying? Come and see. And they commented the gospel writers, and they spent the rest of that day with him. As ordinary as you can get. You met someone, they invited you to their house, you spent that day there.
Yeah.
And it's somehow in a post-religious society, to get back to the idea that the primary place that we interact with God is in the everyday, in the ordinary, in the whatever happens in daily life. And one of the things I found that moving from 22 years of being a professional minister, pastor, whatever you want to call it, and then moving into an area of social business. For me, in my head, there was no significance to the transition. It was the right thing to do at that moment to move into that. But I found that both my religious friends and my atheist friends both thought, that's really strange. What are you, I don't understand what you're doing. So there was a sense amongst my religious friends that I was somehow abandoning my, my call in some way. And amongst the non-religious people, they were kind of saying, "Oh, I thought you were on the other side. Now are you coming over to our side now?" That kind of sense. Whereas for me, it's what your profession is it's not irrelevant, but it's not the who's paying your wages. And I think that one of the things that I really admired and enjoyed about Dallas Willard was that he taught in an ordinary university all of his working life, and that was where he sensed that his call was to be. That's where life with God was worked out.
I sense it was a process for him to accept as well. Because before he accepted that position, he wanted to be a pastor. He wanted to be, or a speaker, or something of that sort. And it's only after a number of years there that you do start to hear him talk about the importance of doing a good job where you are, and he grabs this phrase out of the Gospels, and I can't remember it now myself. Occupy until I come is this idea of comes out of one of Jesus's parables, and this sense of I'm putting you in charge of this for the moment, and I'm gonna come back and we'll see how you've done. And he, gradually came to the place of being able to accept, okay, I'm a teacher here. My job is to teach philosophy. What? So, I was struck. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that was so important because he later emphasized so much this idea that our core problem is this segregation of the life of faith off into this corner, that it's about what you believe, but not something that anybody can know. And he challenged that in his thinking and his writing and his speaking, but also in his life. That he was able to do these, to live out the life that he lived, and to put what he understood about God and God and his ways into the thinking that was the development of his philosophical position
Yeah.
in his writing and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's setting that up here in this book, here in this section. That is, he's trying to show that that's how Jesus lived his life as well. That he didn't have these religious teachings that he gave to people on the weekends, and then he has his own life that is kind of this, he likes to, I don't know, I can't imagine what a godless Jesus would do, but he doesn't. There, it's all integrated, and he's trying to set that up, because more as you get deeper into the book, he's going to start talking about being a student of Jesus, and being a student of Jesus where we are right now. So not getting better at going to church or getting better at reading the Bible or whatever we've sort of thought that Jesus is best at, but getting better at being a father in our cases, or being a grandfather in your case, or I remember you said you were fixing the dishwasher, so you've got handyman chores around in your shop that and those are the places where we are students of Jesus.
Yes, yes, and many times there has been for me that experience of doing something as mundane as fixing a dishwasher or whatever, and knowing again that sense of being guided and led, not just in what the problem is or what needs to be done about it, but also how I should be with the problem. How am I to be as I sit with this problem and work with it? How am I to be with the others who are watching, maybe waiting for the dishwasher to be fixed or something like that. I remember one incident where someone who was working in our place, who was a Muslim, and he something had happened to the guy who was working on the dishwasher, loading the dishwasher and unloading and all that, and so there was dishes to be done, and I was around, and so I went in and started doing it. And this guy was working in the kitchen, and he could not see that the boss was in there. He came in and he was starting to do it, and I was saying, "It was okay. I can do it." And he said, "Where I come from," he said, the boss is king, And I said to him, the best bosses are the ones who serve. And I remember afterwards, just a few days later, he came up and started asking me about the difference between Christianity and Islam. And that really struck me that there was something in that I was being taught about how to be in that situation. And it was just ordinary and normal and nothing, I wasn't trying to preach or anything like that, but it's still, that there was a lesson there for me to be received and learned. And also on many occasions, I have been amazed at my technical ability, because I didn't have, I was able to fix things that I should not have been able to fix, because I didn't have the expertise or the skills or the know-how or anything like that. But lo and behold, it just happens. And at one stage, the staff at this thing, that if Seán just touches it, it'll start working again, because it just happens so often. But I love that idea that no matter what our situation, the brain surgeon, dishwasher fixer, or anything else in between those two can find skills that they need and the help that they need in doing that. And I've talked to surgeons who would testify to that, and say the same thing.
I can imagine how that would be quite a change for a culture. I'm thinking of what you said about the Ireland of your childhood and of the early parts of your ministry, when you said that even though people were in church, there was a huge disconnect between that and their everyday life, and the main reason for that is this sort of picture of Jesus wasn't being taught, and a picture of Jesus in which you can enter, in which he will come into your ordinary life as a teacher, wasn't being taught.
Yeah.
Now, this section is about Jesus entering the ordinary world a long time ago, and he doesn't do that in the same way for us. And so what are some ways in which he has met you in ordinary life, that can maybe give us a picture of how he shows up?
Yeah. I think that there are. So for me, early on, there would have been some of the challenging moments or the crisis moments. I remember one of my biggest challenges around the time that I was reading The Divine Conspiracy and learning some of these things was my own dad, who was a very, very traditional conservative Catholic. So everything that I did basically was, he didn't get it at all. He wasn't antagonistic, but he would never ask me about it. It was almost like he was afraid of it. And we couldn't talk about things like that. With my mother I could, but not with him. So I remember once saying to somebody, if I could see the work of God in my dad's life and in our relationship with each other, that would be really, that's sort of the top of my list. In 2008, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and the doctor said that this was so sudden. It was he seemed to be in perfect health, and then one day he drove his car into a parked car. The car was parked, and he crashed into it because he didn't see it. And so it was obvious then that there was something wrong, and within a couple of weeks they found out it was a brain tumor. And the doctor said to my mother, this will be very quick, weeks, not months. And he was right. It was less than 2 months later that he died. But in those 2 months, there was a striking change in him and in his basic posture and openness. And the way the circumstances happened, and it didn't happen just once or twice, but many, many times. There's 9 of us I have 8 siblings. But at the moment, we were taking turns to help out and to be there. But in the moments of crisis, it always happened that I was the one who was there when those things were happening. So it wasn't planned that way, but that's the way it was. And so this relationship developed between my dad and I that I had longed for all my life. And it was like given as a gift right at the end of his life, so much so that right at the end, when he was almost unconscious but not quite, I was the one who actually was able to give him permission to go and he responded, and within a minute or two, he was gone. He had died. And some of my other siblings were there, and we laughed at the time. And I said, that's the first time Daddy ever did what I told him he should do this whole life. So that would have been sort of that was a big thing, a huge thing in my life. But then also there would have been in the very, very ordinary, everyday, mundane things, particularly in relationships. I think that's where I would have experienced the guidance and the wisdom of God more than anything, in knowing what to say, in knowing what not to say, in knowing when to say nothing at all. That I found that my awareness of what was going on in a conversation changed completely. And then when it came to the business as well, I had zero background in business. I'd never had any involvement in any kind of business. And my capacity to handle the household finances was so poor that Anna, my wife, took them over for quite a few years, because she figured she couldn't do a worse job than I was doing, But then we started up this business, and one person that I went to for advice said to me, he said, to make this work, you need to know food and you need to know business, and you don't know either of them. He said, it won't work. And so instead of, in the past, something like that would have offended me, and I would have kind of got my back up about it. But in that situation, I thought, he's right. And I went looking for help, and I contacted a friend, and I contacted my sister who had worked in food and hospitality all her life, and a friend who had worked in business all his life. And they became my partners in the project. All of us working for nothing, because there was no money for anybody. We weren't earning anything. And just to know that was the right thing to do in that situation, and also then to experience their response when I come to them saying, will you work really hard for this project, bring in all the skills that you've accumulated over the years, and your reward will be nothing except the pleasure of doing it. And they're both saying yes to that, and looking back later, years later, with such, fulfillment on what was accomplished through that. I find those kind of things, I look back and say, how did that happen? How did we do that? And there's a lot of stories like
yeah.
I remember one other story, just to one grey November day when I was in the middle of trying to set up this business, and something had fallen through. I think maybe an offer we put in on a property or something like that had been rejected. And I remember walking through this area of Dublin and thinking, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. And as I walked by this space that was used as an exhibition space, I see in that space there's an exhibition to do with the work of the American short story writer Flannery O'Connor, who I had read, but would not have been a very well-known figure or writer here. So just to see that amazed me that it was there. So I went in and I started reading all these sections from her stories, from her books, and every one of them is for me. They're all saying things about my situation at the moment and where I am. And I walk out just an hour later, overwhelmed by what I have received from that. And a day or two later, I get a phone call from somebody I know in the States, in Georgia, who is organizing this conference, and his speaker has just pulled out, and he's saying, I know it's really short notice, Sean, but we would pay your airfare and we'd bring you over and everything. I wonder, would you be willing to step in and to do this thing, you know? And the thought in my head as I'm going, thinking about going to this place is, that's about an hour away from where Flannery O'Connor lived and worked and so on. So 10 days, maybe 2 weeks after I walked past this exhibition, I'm in the house that she lived in and worked in on the other side of the Atlantic, you know. I did nothing except just say yes to it.
Yeah.
So there was that sense of the activity of God, paying attention, but also then just being acted on almost, you know, that because you're a willing participant in this relationship, you are surprised. I think that's the way to put it. You know, you're surprised by gifts that are a reminder to you of how much you're loved, I guess.
Yeah. You told me before that you were one of the most important takeaways from this book was this sense of doing your work with God entering into your work or working on his projects as well. We've talked about a number of those things already. But you know, so you said you help people who are still in church work of some sort. You're mentor, coach for people, but then you know your work now is with this cafe. So what does, well, maybe if I can even ask more widely, not just specific to the cafe, but what does cooperating with God look like for you now?
Let me tell you the story of the genesis of the project, because that would probably be a good illustration of what it was. So it came about through two things. One was I looked at how Dublin was developing in the boom years of up to 2008, and all the emphasis was on building working space and building living space. So lots of offices, lots of apartments. That's what was being built in Dublin at that time. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, and where do people meet? Where do they form community? Where do they connect with each other? All these people who are coming to work in the offices and live in the apartments, because that's the essence of humanity. And that was just being completely ignored in the whole planning and development process. So I was aware of that and remember thinking about that and thinking, what should be done about that? And then when Anna and I went away, actually just after my dad died that summer, I had an experience unlike anything that I'd ever had, where I essentially was given instructions to say it was time to move on from my role as leader of the church that I was in and to start something new in the city. And that was all that I knew about it, and except that it wouldn't be overtly religious, and that it would have something to do with hospitality, those two things. And so then over the next couple of years, I gave the church a year's notice and left a year later. And I thought that we might get the project going in 6 months, but it took over 2 years. And in those 2 years, I began to learn more and more about how the city functions and what works in the city and what doesn't work in the city, and why it is the way it is very often. And I also got a growing sense of God's heart for the city because of the density of people in the city and because of the numbers of people who live there, and also people from all kinds of extremes, the very wealthy and the very poor, the people who have nothing. So when it finally came to the place where we were able to open this up, there was a number of values that had been set in place, not because they'd been written down anywhere, but it was almost like because I'd been shown them. So from the very beginning, we made it a place where everybody was welcome. And one of our things was the only person that's not welcome is the person who makes others feel unwelcome. So we began to operate this policy that if you couldn't afford to pay, that didn't matter. You got what you needed in terms of food or drink, but we didn't advertise that or make a loud noise about that, because if we did, then the place would have been taken over by people in need only, and there wouldn't have been a place for anybody else. So it was a very nuanced, careful development, and all of that sense was that this is somehow being led. And then the people who came along to get involved and to work there, some of them quite needy in their own way, and to see them thrive and develop in that and realize, they've been given to us as well. They've become part of this. And the area that we opened in the city was an area that at that time was in quite a lot of difficulty, and many people advised us not to go there. They said, it's not a good place to go, and we kept saying, well, that's why we're going there. We want to do good, be good for that part of the city. And I remember the first winter we were open, there was, we immediately became busy. There was people flocked into the place from the day we opened. It was just amazing. And we hadn't done anything in terms of advertising or anything like that to do it. And that first winter we had done like kind of candle lights in the window and things like that. So the place was looking nice on a dark winter's evening. And this customer, a guy who was a lawyer, one of our first customers, actually, the first day we opened, he was coming up the square and he saw the place and, lit up with the candles and everything. And he just opened the door and stuck his head in and said, I just want to say the place looks wonderful as you walk up the square. It looks great, really nice. I said, oh, thanks, Kenny. And he closed the door and went up. And then about 30 seconds later, the door opened again and he stuck his head back in and he said, it's a wonderful thing that you have done. And he just turned around and walked away again. This guy's a lawyer, barrister. But that kind of thing made you realize, yeah, it is. It's wonderful. It's full of wonder, because there's something going on there that none of us was capable of doing. We were not.
Yeah.
That is so. That's the kind of thing that artists do and things like that. You don't know how it's done, but it's wonderful to see it being done. And that was that sense that we had, that none of us were the artists, that there was another artist who was just helping us to do that. So I think that level of collaboration or cooperation is intended to be a natural part of the life that we live with God every day. Like the boys, Peter and John, going up to the temple, and the guy's looking for money, and he said, we can't give you money, but how about we heal you, and that must have been just spontaneous, completely spur of the moment. So I think that sense of adventure, collaboration in adventure, I find that's what we're being invited into. In a million different contexts, that's just my context,
Yeah. What stands out to me about your story there about Third Space and the cafe restaurant is that was a long process. It's a long process to get to the point that a lawyer sticks his head in store and says, "This is wonderful." It wasn't something that just developed in a matter of hours. And
No.
I think that's typical of how God works with us. Or at least those are the things that he cares more about. There are sort of faster events. If you're open to it, things will happen. But those aren't as important as something like this that's years in the making to kind of become something. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. God is never in a hurry. Never. And we get uptight so much about time. And God has all the time he needs.
Yeah.
So, yes, and he does choose to take his time.
Right.
30, Jesus is, when he's, hitting the road.
Yeah.
30
Yeah.
years of age.
Yeah. Well, I've got one final question for you, and that is, we've spoken a lot about maybe Jesus's obscurity in Europe and in Ireland. We've talked about how he's available right underneath our noses, and yet when I look underneath my nose, I don't see Jesus, and I don't see God's working there necessarily. So he's not, parting the heavens, and it's not this huge, undeniable show. What for those who are perhaps looking for Jesus and thinking, okay, I don't see him here, but what kinds of things can they do to maybe hunt him out?
Great question. I think to start with is to accept that if I believe that he is there, or if I'm going to operate on that assumption to go seeking, then don't expect it to be like anything else that you have experienced before. So you're looking for something, you're seeking for something that you haven't experienced before. And that's where, organized religion of any kind or any hue can often be a hindrance, because most of us, if we haven't experienced, at least we're aware of it. So we're looking for something like that. And yet you read the Gospels and that's not the way it is, with Jesus. The second thing I would say is it requires that you really begin to pay attention to everything that's going on in your life every day. If the kingdom of God is under your nose, then you don't need to go somewhere else to find it. You need to start paying attention where you are now. Because the reality is, if Jesus is right, then it's been there all along and you've never seen it up until now, whatever age you are in life. So you need to give it the kind of attention that you've never given it before. And that involves stillness, quietness, letting go of a bunch of other things, and allowing yourself the space and the time and the stillness to simply consider, now, is there anything else here? Have I missed something? um, and to allow the stillness to begin to speak to you. And then I would say somewhere in the middle of that, get a hold of one of the Gospels and begin to just allow it to seep into your being. I would say Mark's Gospel to people because it's kind of the most simple, straightforward, full of stories, get straight into the action. Chapter 1, you're right into it. And just ponder it, allow it. Don't try to analyze it. Don't just allow the things to treat them as stories, and pay attention particularly to what they do to you. What do they do to you emotionally? What do they do to your desires? To your longing? Do you wish it was true? Whatever you think about it, you know. And I think that those are the kinds of ways that today we need to begin the search in order to unlearn what we have learned in our culture. Even if we've never been involved in any kind of organized religion, there's still a lot of unlearning to do from the way our culture has been. I think it's really important that we begin a search for reality, not a search for just a series of ideas or thoughts or something that you will have to believe in, because you can never know that it's true. You know, that's very often the understanding. But what you're looking for is reality. It's just another kind of reality, a reality that you've never been able to see before. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. Surely science, if it taught us anything, it taught us that. There's a lot more to reality than we've ever seen up to now.
Well, I'm not going to try to improve on that, Seán. That was pretty good. We'll just think about that going forward. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for sharing what you've pulled out of this book and how it's affected your life. I wish you the best with your ongoing projects there in Dublin.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure. A real pleasure.
And maybe one day we'll show up with the video camera and we'll sit together and do one without headphones. Okay.
Good.
Well, thanks for watching and listening. And if this was helpful, then do hit like buttons or write nice reviews. Send us an email or write in the comments about this. And if you're in Dublin, go check out Third Space, and possibly Seán will be there working, and I'm sure he'd love to greet you. Next video, we'll be back with something on the next section, Made to Rule. Yeah, thanks for being here. See you next time. But it's fine.
That's okay.
Yeah.